The Wrath of the Lich King World of Warcraft expansion released on the 13th of November in 2008 has long been regarded as Blizzard's most successful expansion and the peak of World of Warcraft, and today we're going to be looking at some of the most interesting class spells added to the game. This was a time when the talent trees were bigger and the quantity of spells bountiful before Blizzard began the great pruning and purging of spells and talents. Our first ability on this list is the iconic ability Thunderstorm, also considered by many players to be the most satisfying, cheesy and frustrating abilities. You call down a bolt of lightning, energizing you and damaging nearby enemies within 10 yards, restores 8% mana to you and deals 1450 to 1656 nature damage to all nearby enemies, knocking them back 20 yards. This spell is usable while stunned. People got the most use out of this spell in their PvP environment. Shamans would use this ability in key areas such as the cliff near the lumber mill base and the blacksmith, but the most deadly location was the flag area in the Eye of the Storm battleground, as you can see from the background footage. You can get pretty cheesy instant kills because you're totally transporting that player out of the map, which obviously inevitably just kills them. Blizzard actually had to patch in some extra rocks on either side of the area for rated battleground since people were using the trick so much, and if you had a shaman on your group then you had a very clear advantage. First ability that everyone thinks of when they think of a warrior is definitely Bladestorm. This was the last talent point within the arms tree added in Wrath of the Lich King. Instantly whirlwind up to 4 nearby targets, and for the next 6 seconds you will perform a whirlwind every 1 second. While under the effects of Bladestorm you can move but cannot perform any other abilities, but you do not feel pity or remorse or fear as you cannot be stopped unless killed. That is a little bit of flavour text that references the Terminator. By now there's probably hundreds of warrior PvP montages on YouTube of warriors stacking out offensive buffs straight into a Bladestorm and wiping out entire groups of green geared people in battlegrounds. What then made this ability so powerful was the fast frequency of the attacks that are influenced by other cooldowns such as Recklessness, and you become totally immune to crowd control effects and snare effects so that the damage is totally unstoppable. One of Rogue's most fun and satisfying abilities in the game is Killing Spree, a powerful AoE cooldown that can also be used for defensive purposes since you become untargetable and jump around multiple enemies for a short period of time. Step through the shadows from enemy to enemy within 10 yards, attacking an enemy every 0.5 seconds with both weapons until 5 assaults are made, and increasing all damage up to 20% for the duration. Can hit the same target multiple times, cannot hit invisible or stealthed targets. It's probably one of the jankiest abilities ever added to WoW since it moves your camera position so frequently it can sometimes be a little disorientating and you can kind of get confused of where we've actually ended up. But nonetheless, this ability did a lot of damage thanks to that quick 20% damage buff and the fact that the damage was based on your weapon damage, and you technically do the damage from both weapons since you're hitting with both weapons simultaneously. The cooldown could also be reduced further by a glyph of 45 seconds for a total of 1 minute and 25 seconds, and in PvP this is a great ability to just totally confuse and disorientate your enemies. For a long time, Metamorphosis has always been a very niche yet interesting and fun transformation ability. Just having the ability to transform into a purple Illidan looking demon with leaping, charging and even knockback abilities added later in the game was obviously pretty cool. You transform into a demon for 30 seconds. This form increases your armor contribution from items by 600%, damage by 20%, reduces the chance you'll be critically hit by melee attacks by 6%, and reduces the duration of stun and snare effects by 50%. You gain some unique demon abilities in addition to your normal abilities. Transforming into the Metamorphosis form almost felt like an entirely unique and individual class. In ways they actually feel like turning into an NPC through like a mind control effect. It's a shame Blizzard didn't really ever make the real effort to really flesh out this kind of build. It's always been a sidelined, crazy idea that was later totally removed from the game, and I guess it became just more of an offensive cooldown rather than a full-on build, and then obviously they totally removed it to make place for demon hunters. This ability could have easily made a viable mainstream warlock tank possible throughout World of Warcraft's lifetime. Army of the Dead is one of the last surviving big cooldown abilities in World of Warcraft. These are very present in vanilla, such as things like Retaliation having a 30-minute cooldown. Army of the Dead had a big cooldown because it was so ridiculously overpowered, because it nearly gave you equal power of an entire dungeon group. Summons an entire legion of ghouls to fight for the Death Knight. The ghouls will swarm the area, taunting and fighting anything they can. This became a Death Knight's #1 ability for soloing difficult elite enemies, especially since the ghouls would actually taunt enemies and soak any incoming damage. It was used less in a raiding environment since the spell would accidentally pull bosses if a Death Knight wasn't careful, and tanks would always complain that it interferes with their tanking. There are actually some crazy videos out there of Death Knights soloing raid bosses, well not soloing, but soloing in a group of Death Knights without healers, which is, you know, obviously made possible not only by their strong self-healing capabilities, but multiple armies of the dead soaking all of the damage. Using a spell would make you feel like a necromancer, or even like a mini Lich King. In Wrath of the Lich King, the Hunter's disengage ability was totally redesigned into a new ability which was way more fun and way more useful. I am technically breaking the rules a little bit here because this isn't a new ability, but I feel like it was reworked so much it really did become a new spell. If you attempt to disengage from combat, leaping backwards can only be used while in combat. This became a Hunter's strongest gap opening cooldown, which became very useful in kiting PvE enemies and escaping the pressure of a melee class in PvP. The ability is unique in the sense that it doesn't just displace your character horizontally like a mage's blink or a charge, but also vertically by moderately jumping you up into the air. This meant that in PvP you could trick disengage onto raised platforms, and it also opened up the opportunity for hunters to engage in exploration options unique to their class that other classes couldn't reach, but only when the in-combat limitation was removed. For number 7 we have another Warlock ability, the Demonic Circle spell combo. Teleports you to your Demonic Circle and removes all snare effects. The principle was very simple and overpowered. You summon a marker for your Demonic Circle, and the second ability will teleport you to the marker as long as you're within 40 yards range. And you can probably imagine Warlocks use this in arena in locations where you could totally line of sight their enemies. For instance, behind pillars or up on the bridge in Blade Edge's arena. It's probably one of the most overpowered escape abilities in the game, especially as you can use it instantly without any hassle. In a raiding environment, it's also very useful in avoiding mechanics or for quickly jumping to locations that you needed to be for certain mechanics. Now we have a Druid ability, Starfall, the last talent point in the balance tree, yet another satisfying AoE ability similar to a Mage's Combustion explosion during Cataclysm. You summon a flurry of stars from the sky on all targets within 30 yards of the caster, each dealing 563 to 653 arcane damage, also causes 101 arcane damage to all other enemies within 5 yards of the enemy target, to a maximum of 20 stars, lasts 10 seconds, shapeshifting into an animal form or mounting cancels the effect. Any effect which causes you to lose control of your character will also suppress the Starfall effect. Starfall was one of those abilities that made you feel like you've just thrown 100 firecrackers at somebody, and it didn't require any form of complicated setup or any perfect timing. You just pop the spell and Starfall goes into autopilot mode, automatically doing insane AoE damage without you having to do anything but stand close to your enemies. The only downside obviously was that if you got nicked by a crowd control effect, the effect of Starfall would be suppressed and the whole cooldown wasted. Next we have a Paladin AoE ability, Divine Storm. Obviously you probably noticed it by now as most of these abilities on the list are AoE abilities, and the reason I've done that is because, let's be honest, it's just incredibly satisfying to blow up enemies and trash packs with AoE damage in this game. An instant weapon attack that deals 110% of weapon damage up to 4 enemies within 8 yards. The Divine Storm heals up to 3 party or raid members, totaling 25% of the damage caused. So this ability was one of the key factors in finally making the Retribution spec a competitive PvE DPS spec finally, and a force to be totally reckoned with. Many classes lacked any form of consistent AoE potential before Wrath of the Lich King. It was a time when many frustrations and limitations of all of the classes were ultimately dealt with. And Divine Storm was obviously one of these godsends. It was a very strong ability that scaled with weapon total damage, had a satisfying animation, and the added bonus providing some AoE healing to the melee group. And lastly we're going to finish on a iconic defensive cooldown, Dispersion. Before this ability, priests were considered one of the most squishy classes next to a Resto Shaman, but Dispersion mitigated this reputation. You disperse into pure shadow energy, reducing all damage taken by 90%. You are unable to cast or attack spells, but you regenerate 6% mana every 1 second for 6 seconds. Dispersion can be cast while stunned, feared or silenced, and clears all snare and movement impairing effects when cast. It makes you immune to them while dispersed. It was a spell with many different functions. First of all, it was a very strong defensive cooldown, secondly a powerful escaping tool, and also a cheeky mana regeneration bonus for long raid fights. Unfortunately, back in the Wrath days, this spell was at the end of the Shadow spec tree. It wasn't available to the healing specs, but nonetheless it was one of the key spells in a Shadow Priest toolkit that made them one of the most powerful specs for PvP, particularly in comps like Priest Mage Resto Druid, appropriately nicknamed the God Comp. But anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed this list of spells added in Wrath of the Lich King. Let me know your favourite spells in the comment section below. My name is Medagoblin. To my next video, ciao.